This material is a script for a video commentary critiquing Matt Walsh's America-only ideology by arguing it is fundamentally illogical, unbiblical, and functionally impossible on the global stage. So let's dive straight into the feedback, starting with the structure and flow.
The opening of this script buries its strongest conceptual hooks beneath extended preamble and generalized meta commentary. We are looking at a classic case of a writer feeling the need to excessively warm up before they actually start playing the game.
Yeah, reading that first page, I was honestly tapping my foot a bit, waiting for the argument to start.
Right, because the weakness here is that the author spends a massive chunk of time at the very beginning just throat clearing. They discuss their desire to express their thoughts. They throw out these broad disclaimers about not being an expert.
And they use that really vague language about exposing illogical and irrational nonsense.
Which is a huge problem. The most compelling and original ideas in the piece don't actually appear until the listener is incredibly deep into the material. This delayed pacing severely risks losing the audience before the core argument even begins.
It feels exactly like going to a high-end restaurant and having the chef come out to your table to spend 10 minutes explaining why he's not classically trained before he even hands you the menu.
That is a perfect analogy. When a creator starts by minimizing their own expertise, the audience unconsciously lowers their expectations. And it's frustrating because the actual meal being served later in the script is fantastic.
So what is the suggestion here? How do we fix this pacing issue?
The suggestion is to restructure the introduction to completely eliminate the meta-commentary and lead immediately with one of the most striking conceptual frameworks or concrete contradictions. They need to invert the structure.
Just pull a massive concept from minute 10 right into the first 10 seconds to hook them instantly.
Exactly.
Let's give some concrete examples of how they could actually implement this inversion. And of course, these are just a few out of all possible ways to solve the problem.
Sure. Instead of starting with that paragraph where they say, "I've been thinking about a way to express kind of my thoughts," they could cut that first paragraph entirely.
And open directly with the family analogy they develop later.
Right. Imagine starting the piece simply by asking, if a human family shouldn't let the strongest member oppress the weakest, why do we accept that logic for nations?
That is a phenomenal hook. It poses a direct, thought-provoking question that demands an answer right out of the...
And it instantly introduces the isomorphic concept they play with later, without getting bogged down in defining Greek roots before the audience even cares.
Or another concrete example would be leading with the undeniable physical reality of global defense.
Yes, the technological contradiction. They could open by stating, Matt Walsh advocates for an America-only policy, but the very fighter jets defending American airspace rely on advanced helmet technology developed in Israel.
Grounding a sweeping ideological debate in the physical reality of a fighter jet helmet is incredibly sticky. It immediately shifts them from being a person just sharing feelings into an authoritative voice.
Which brings up a great point about maintaining authority throughout the entire piece.
That makes perfect sense. Moving on to our second area of focus. Let's look at tone and style.
The persuasive power of the argument is frequently undermined by highly emotionally charged and repetitive dismissals.
Yeah, once they finally get into the meat of the argument, the material leans heavily on terms like garbage, complete nonsense, and completely stupid.
The specific weakness here is that while those phrases might resonate with an audience that already agrees with the author, they significantly diminish the analytical weight of the critique. It alienates listeners who are on the fence.
Plus, the constant repetition of filler words like just basically detracts from the speaker's authority. It makes the script read more like an unpolished rant than a rigorous, structured takedown of an ideology.
It really does. Calling an idea garbage is loud, but it lacks skill. When you have a genuinely strong point, you don't need to yell at the audience that the other side is stupid.
So the suggestion here is to elevate the vocabulary and allow the underlying logic of the argument to do the heavy lift.
Precisely. The author needs to shift the tone from frustrated dismissal to surgical, objective deconstruction.
Surgical deconstruction is exactly the right frame. Let's provide some concrete examples of how to apply that, acknowledging these are just a couple of options available to the writer.
Let's look at how they discuss the reality of extreme isolationism. They need to replace subjective attacks with precise, descriptive language that highlights the flaw in the logic.
So instead of calling the target's views stupid and irrational, they could explicitly state the systemic friction.
Exactly. A concrete example would be writing, "This extreme isolationism is fundamentally incompatible with the reality of global supply chains."
That phrasing sounds like an expert geopolitical analysis rather than an ad hominem attack. And what about that specific section dealing with the vulnerability of non-nuclear nations like Sweden and South Sudan?
For that section, rather than calling the opposing view convoluted and completely illogical, the suggestion is frame it as a dangerous precedent.
So a concrete rewrite for that part might look something like, applying this logic means conceding that mutually assured destruction is the only valid right to sovereignty.
Yes, it takes the exact same underlying thought and strips away the emotive frustration to make it so much more impactful.
It treats the listener as an intellectual equal and makes them pause and reflect. It clears away the opposing ideology without ever needing to hurl insults.
Removing those emotional dismissals tightens the script, speeds up the pacing, and creates a real sense of inevitability in the argument.
Exactly. Now let's tackle our third area: completeness and focus.
The script attempts to weave together a theological critique and a secular geopolitical analysis, but leaves the biblical framework notably underdeveloped.
This is a massive structural collision happening at the core of the script. Early on, the author explicitly sets up a premise to hold the target to biblical standards because of his Catholic faith.
That the weakness is that the follow-through on this theological lens is remarkably thin. Aside from a passing mention of, "God says you shall not oppress the weak," and a brief reference to the Tower of Babel, the script largely abandons the religious angle.
Right. It pivots entirely into secular geopolitical concepts like nuclear deterrence, mutually assured destruction, and win-win military negotiations.
Which creates a split focus that prevents either argument from reaching its maximum depth.
It's a very jarring dissonance for the listener. You invoke someone's specific faith to defeat their ideology using their own rulebook, and then you just drop it and pull out a calculator.
It oscillates wildly between the pulpit and the Pentagon. The suggestion to fix this is that the author must commit fully to one primary analytical lens or significantly bolster the theological side to ensure the initial promise to the listener is fulfilled.
They have to decide what kind of critique this is going to be. Let's explore concrete examples of how the author could take this in either direction, since both paths are highly viable. These are just two ways to solve the split focus.
Let's start with the theological path. If the author wants to maintain the theological critique, they should integrate specific scriptural backing for the isomorphic family-to-nation concept.
So since the target is specifically identified as Catholic, weaving in established Catholic social teachings on global solidarity would make the critique incredibly sharp and tailored.
Exactly. They could cite the universal destination of goods, for example, which is the doctrine that the Earth's resources are meant for everyone. That completely dismantles extreme isolationism from a Catholic perspective.
Using the robust intellectual history of that exact tradition to dismantle the argument shows incredible preparation. But what if they realize their strongest arguments are actually the secular, practical one?
Then the solution is incredibly straightforward. The concrete example for the secular route is to completely remove the biblical standard setup entirely.
Just cut it out.
Yes. Instead, double down on the excellent realpolitik points already present in the material. They can expand on the mutually beneficial nature of U.S.-Israel military technology sharing and the practical impossibilities of absolute isolationism.
By committing to the secular path, the critique shifts away from moral failing and simply becomes an itemized receipt of why extreme isolationism is a functional impossibility.
Precisely. Finding a piece's true center of gravity is crucial for audience retention and persuasion.
So, to recap the main points of our critique today. First, restructure the introduction to eliminate the meta-commentary entirely. Lead immediately with the strongest conceptual hook, like the family analogy or the fighter jet technology.
Second, refine the tone. Rely on logical deconstruction and precise vocabulary rather than emotional dismissals.
And finally, decide whether to fully commit to the theological critique by integrating specific Catholic social teaching or streamline the focus onto the geopolitical arguments by removing the biblical setup completely.
These actionable steps will significantly elevate the material and make it much more authoritative and engaging.
We highly encourage the author to apply these revisions and submit the updated work back to us for another